Welcome back to my channel, everyone. It's Charles here from Charles in Photography. The bridge you see in front of us is called the Story Bridge in the heart of Brisbane, and today we're going to be photographing this bridge in panoramic format. Now, there's just been a break in the weather. It's been raining all morning and there's actually a fairly big storm coming our way, so we'll get moving and I'll show you how to photograph this Story Bridge in panoramic format. So we're going to be photographing the Story Bridge. My gear for today is my Nikon D500 and I'm using the Nikon 18 to 140mm lens. Sometimes I don't like using the Tokina 11 to 20 in the city because it is so wide, so I would actually be getting so much sky then having to crop out, because the panorama we're shooting, we're wanting to get an image like 9 by 16 or 6 by 18. So I'm going to have to zoom in quite a bit, and if I was using the Tokina lens at 20mm, which is the most I can zoom in, I would still have to crop quite a bit of the sky and the foreground. So this is why I'm using the Nikon 18 to 140mm. So hopefully I can actually do this whole video, because coming from this side here we have a huge storm front coming. So I'm using my Manfrotto 055 XP Pro, and I'll take the camera off just for a tick here, just to show you. I'll unclick here. Never put stuff on the rail because there's water down there, and if it goes down you'll never get it back. So as you can see, I don't have a bald head. I have a leveler which I've used today. I've put it on and I've used a spirit level that I've actually bought, and I've actually drilled a little hole here just so it sits in the middle here, and it's very easy to see if my tripod is level. Now, because I took the leveler off, I'm actually going to have to re-level the camera, the leveler here. If you do a lot of panoramas, this is something definitely handy to have. Now there's two knobs here. The big one is to adjust, and the little one here is actually to lock everything in place so there's no movement. So we'll just lock everything in. Perfect. Don't need that anymore. Put it in my pocket. We put the rotator on. That's it. Now I can actually put the camera on. So the rotator's on. Now I put the camera on. So I'll just turn it this way. So normally when you have an L bracket on your tripod like this to shoot in portrait orientation, because when you're shooting panoramas, you have to shoot in portrait orientation. That way you get the most detail in your image. Normally, as you can see, the L bracket is square. But the problem is when it's square, you're actually shooting horizontally. Here, I actually want to tilt up a bit. So if you had a bald head like this on here, and you actually tilted the bald head like so, what happens is when you're turned around, you're actually going to get an arc. You don't want that, because trying to fix that curvature in your horizon and in the distortion in everything that you're photographing is very hard. So now all I do is I actually undo the and just move it slightly. Then I use live view. We'll turn it around, and it's not really tight, so I actually use it just to get an idea of where I want it. Now, I know I'm going to want to shoot at around 28, 30 mils. Okay, 24 mils. So I'm looking around, I've got a bit of foreground. That's perfect. I can lock it tight, that's it. Perfect. Before I worry about the camera settings and all that, I have to make sure that I have enough overlap. And when I did the first video on how to shoot panoramas, which I'll actually link here now, you'll actually see I talk about why you have to have at least 1/3 overlap, but not more than 2/3, or else your program might get confused and might actually drop a frame during the stitching of the panorama. So I'm looking here through the viewfinder, and I'm just wanting to make sure that as I move, you saw in the first video that I've got a huge building in front of the Story Bridge here. So I'm actually looking, and what I want is I want to see that building at least 3 times in my frames. So every time I move, I want to see it once. So as long as it appears 3 times in the consecutive frames, I know I'm doing good. So on this rotator, the minimum I can do is 24 degrees. At this focal length, I'll get the big building in front of me here 2.5 times. That should be enough to get me a very good stitching. When we're shooting like this, I know I've got this huge storm coming from the left here. the clouds are actually going to be coming from left to right. It doesn't matter, there's a bit of ripples here, there's not many waves. Because I know the clouds are going from left to right, I'm actually going to be photographing this panorama from left to right. If I photograph from right to left, I could get a break in the clouds, and the clouds will look like broken up. So we want to go with the flow of the clouds, so we're going to go left to right. If the clouds were coming the other way, from right to left, I would actually be shooting right to left. If you're photographing in the dead of night, it doesn't really matter which way you go. But I always prefer, weather conditions permitting, to actually shoot left to right. That's how I actually like shooting my panos. Now, we're happy with everything. Now we can talk about settings. When I shoot panoramas, I don't like shooting aperture priority. The reason being is when you're shooting in aperture priority, your shutter speed could change. If you're shooting in shutter priority, your aperture could change. So I like shooting panoramas in manual mode. That way I can actually lock down my settings. I can lock down the ISO, I can lock down the f-stop and my shutter speed. White balance, exactly the same thing. I like locking it down. I like using manual white balance. If you don't want to use manual white balance, then you can actually use one of the presets. And for daytime like this, you can use the sunny, or it's very cloudy and stormy today, so you can actually use the cloudy mode. At the moment, on my manual white balance, I've actually set for around 5,800, which is very close to cloudy. I don't want it too warm because the clouds aren't that warm. So first, I want to lock down the ISO. Daytime, ISO 100. Then, I want to look at my aperture, my f-stop. This is going to tell me how much depth of field that I have. Now, as you can see, I don't have any foreground detail. The bridge is close to 100 meters away from me. So an aperture of around f5.6 to f8 is all I need. I don't need f11. f11 is not going to do me any difference to f8. All it's going to do is my shutter speed is going to be slightly lower. And I'm going to want to pan across fairly quickly to stop any sort of cloud breakage so that the clouds merge very nicely in the sky. We've selected ISO 100, f8. Now it's just a matter of balancing our shutter speed. And I'm rocking around here and it's saying 1/500th of a second. So we shoot in the middle, take a photo. Let's look at our image. Now I can see that I'm slightly underexposed, both on the histogram, but also I actually like using my RGB highlights, because in cloudy weather like this, if you're just looking at your histogram, you could just blow out your highlights. So look at your RGB highlights as well. 1/500 is too quick, so let's bring it down to 1/400. It's still showing my RGB's not blowing. I'll come down to 1/320th. This should just be about right. That's it. Now let's look at my, okay, it's showing my histogram here is very close to the edge, and because I'm actually going to be panning across, sorry, I'm just looking because this storm's really coming across quickly here. This is looking quite good. The secret to getting a very good panorama, we've got all our settings now. I've actually got the camera set to a 2-second timer delay. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rock it round to single exposure. I'm going to use my timer remote. That way I don't have to wait 2 seconds every time I actually move the camera. If I was photographing this at night, I would accept the 2 seconds because we're using longer exposure times and I want to make sure that there's not going to be any movement. But today, 1/320th of a second, as long as I'm not touching the camera, I'm not going to get any sort of movement in the camera. If we've got our time remote, now we've got to look where we want to start the panorama. Now you have to remember, when we're photographing a panorama, give yourself at least 1 or 2 frames either side of your subject. Even though I'm going to cut on the right hand side here about 3-4 centimeters just to the right of the bridge, and on the other side I'll give it a little bit more, I'm going to shoot at least 2 frames more than what I want. This way, when I actually merge, and I'll show you this in part 2 of this tutorial, that you can actually get the tops cut off and all that. So you don't want to actually be shrinking your image thinking like, oh, if I just shot 1 frame either side, I could have gotten the pano that I want. shoot a couple extra frames. It's digital. You'd rather have a couple extra frames than not enough frames in your panorama. So we'll put it on live view and I'm going to rock it around. Okay, so this is where I want it to be. I can just see the top of the roof here. So this is going to be my first frame. Now most of that first frame I'll most likely end up cutting in the panorama, but I want that extra frame. What I'm going to do is rock it around and I can count. So I'm here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's it, 9 frames. I only really want 7, but 1 frame either side. There's no use to shoot here 2 extra frames because I've got the building here. So we've got 9, so I come back to the start. There, happy here. Turn the live view off and we're ready to go. And how I do it is I press, once it goes click, I just use here this big red dial here just to move it. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Perfect. Did you see that I actually let go of the tripod? If you're holding on here, you don't realize, but you could just cause enough camera shake that when you go to merge, you'll actually look and you go like, oh, that one photo, I was just shaking a little bit. Now I suffer from the shakes. It's a problem I've had for quite a few years. Doesn't stop me going out to take photos, but what it means is I've got to be very careful. When I'm taking photos, I'm not holding the camera. You can see, like, if I'm holding it, I'm not exaggerating. This is the type of shake that I have. So if I'm pressing the button here, I'm most likely going to have a blurred image. So this looks good. Now let's review our images. I'm looking at the histogram. Very good. Now, how about let's look at the RGB highlights. Great. This is what I wanted. Now I'm back home in my office. I've downloaded the photos, I've got them into Lightroom, and I've already done a certain amount of editing because I've already done a YouTube video on how to edit panoramas in Lightroom and PTGui from start to finish, and I'll link it here now so you can actually take a look at it if you want. Today I'm actually going to go fairly quickly through the editing in Lightroom, show you how I merge them in PTGui. We're going to bring the panoramic image back into Lightroom for a final touch-up and then save it, just to show you what I do for each image. So I've done basic editing. Let's go and take a look at these photos now. So you can see I've got these 9 photos here. We're going to the develop module. Now I like choosing the middle image to actually do all my editing with, because this was the image that I grabbed all my settings for. So remember, the image was taken at 1/320th of a second, f8, ISO 100, and at 24 millimeters. So you can see here on the right, this is how much editing I've done. Now I just want to add a graduated filter to the top of the image here, just to grunge out the clouds. Now remember, when we were out at the Story Bridge, I said I prefer not to use a graduated filter because if there's a bit of rain around, I get the raindrops, and it's so easy to actually do this in Lightroom. So we're going to do this now. So grab the graduated filter, hold the shift key, bring it straight, and you can see where I'm actually editing it because the color's actually a bit off. We'll just reset the color. Now I just actually want to tone the color down just a little bit here. I don't like having these clouds. On this day, they were more blue than brown, so I'm just toning down the colors a little bit. Now I'm using the range mask today because I don't want the buildings to be affected too much. So I've selected the range mask, luminance. Now I hold down the Alt key here, and I'm just going to go slightly to the right here. Not a lot, that's it. We'll bring the smoothness down a bit, there. Now, if I actually reduce the exposure down a bit, that's it, that looks much better. We bring the highlights down a bit more. Wow, look at that, this is so good. Add a bit of clarity, a bit of texture, and I'll slide up the dehaze. Now the dehaze is really a two-edged sword. You have to be very careful when you use it. Look, if I don't put any dehaze, now look what happens if I just slide it to about 8. Can you see that grunginess there? That just looks so good. I'm actually going to slide up this graduated filter a bit here because I don't want to affect the buildings too much. Give it a bit more taper, up a little bit more. That's it. That looks really good. Now, let's see where it's being affected. That's it. I'm very happy with that. So I click done. Now I'm going to do one quickly as well for the bottom here, just to lift up my shadows a bit. So we go back up to the graduated filter again, and this time I'm going to hold the shift key and press up. And I'm going to take it just above the story bridge there. That's it. Now I'm just going to bring the shadows up a bit. That's it. There. And I can actually warm this area up a little bit. There. It'll just give a little bit of contrast between the sky and the bottom. And the river here, even though it's a bit more brown, on the day it was actually quite brown. Our Brisbane River is never blue, so if you see images with the river blue, there's been a lot of colour adjustments, so I'm happy with that. I click done. So now I'm going to go to the library module. I'm going to click on this image, right click on it, come down here to develop settings and click copy settings. And you can see there's already quite a lot of tick boxes marked, and the tick box for graduated filter is marked. But all these other ones here aren't marked because I didn't use them. If I had cropped the image already, I would click crop. If I had transformed the image, I would click on the transform, but I didn't, so I leave them unchecked. We click copy. Now I come back up to the first image and then click on number 9. I've selected them all now, and I can click on any image here, right click it, come down here, click develop settings, and I click paste settings. Can you see, like, look, there you go. So all the editing that I did on the 5th image has now been transferred to my other images, and you can see now, look, this is actually going to look like a very nice image. Now we will save these images and then open up PTGui. So we choose Control Shift Export. So I click on my Panorama preset because that gives me the preset for my TIFF files, and I want this folder here. That's it. Now I just click export and the images will be exported. So now that the images have been saved, we'll open up PTGui. We'll open the images up. There they are there. Open the 9 of them. Open. Now we click align images, and I click up here, this one here, the round ball. That's it. Now I'm just going to maybe straighten the image up a little bit. That's it. Now if I actually widen it a little bit. Now remember this morning when I actually take these photos, I said that I actually shot an extra frame either side. This is why. Can you see the angle on the sides here, on the left and on the right? They're tilting down. This is why I say we actually shoot an extra frame. It gives us that breathing room. So now I can actually just crop in where I want it to go. Crop this way, and I'll just take out the building here. I'll come down a little bit just to get rid of the top. Now I'll just bring it up here. Look at the straight line here. Can you see how all the images are actually all in line? When they're all in line like this, this actually shows you that you've actually leveled your tripod out properly. Your camera is dead horizontal either way. So like sideways and front to back, because when they're blending like this, it shows a perfect stitch. If you had a slight tilt when on your tripod, if the tripod wasn't perfectly level, you would actually see a tilt left or right in here, but this is dead straight. This is very good. Okay, done, close. Now we just say create panorama. We choose how we want the format saved, which is TIFF. Go to settings. We don't want packed bits, we want no compression. Click OK. Optimum settings, maximum, and click create. That's it, that easy. So now we will import the photo back into Adobe Lightroom. So here's our panorama. Looks good. Now all I want to do is I'll just increase the shadows a little bit. There. And maybe the exposure just slightly. That's it. Perfect. Now all I have to do is just save this image. Now can you see why I was actually a bit harping on a bit that you've got to make sure that your tripod is dead level, both left and right and forward and back, because when it comes to stitching images like that, if the tripod is not correctly leveled, then you're going to have problems when you're going to be stitching the images. And look at this, this is so much better than just shooting at ultra wide. So when we photograph a panoramic image like that, this panorama here is 5 times the size compared to a single image. So if I shot this scene with an ultra wide lens, if I could actually have grabbed all this scene with an ultra wide lens, it would have only been around 20 megapixels, because this is what my D500 captures. But this image here is 250 megapixels. So more than 5 times the size. And there's so much detail here that I could print this up to poster size. So if you found value in this video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time.